the problem for Iran now is that following those Israeli strikes, they appear to have had their production facilities severely damaged. So the stuff that makes the basically the mixes the fuel that goes in ballistic missiles, they've those factories have all been hit, which means that Iran's ability to produce missiles for itself, let alone to export to Russia, is a real problem. And so that could mean that in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin is trying to sustain his war with bombs from Iran, now we see troops from North Korea, that has been undermined by these Israeli airstrikes.
As I say, the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei, is playing down the Israeli airstrikes against Iranian weapons facilities. They killed 4 soldiers on Saturday. The strikes destroyed all 4 of Iran's Russian-supplied S-300 air defense systems and a number of ballistic missile factories, which could have a knock-on on the war in Ukraine. Now, as the death toll continues to rise in Gaza and in Lebanon, American and regional leaders are meeting in Qatar to discuss, well, a hostage release and ceasefire deal again. Let's talk to George Grylls, the defense and political correspondent at The Times. Hello to you, George.
Good afternoon.
So, George, how should we read the reaction then, the Iranian reaction to those Israeli strikes? Is this, as it maybe appears to be, evidence of Iran recognizing its vulnerability?
I think the key thing is what they didn't say. You know, there was no direct threat of retaliation to Iran, and the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, who, you know, wields enormous power, he said it was up to officials about what the exact response of Iran would be. So it feels from that kind of equivocal response very much like he's kind of backpedaling from this cycle of tit for tat strikes between Israel and Iran that we had got into.
Well, in that way, maybe the signs are encouraging. I mean, they've been instructed, the local papers, to resume normal courage. Isn't that right? And threats to people to they go to jail if they started sharing photographs showing the strike's damage.
Yeah, this was sort of Western intelligence was suggesting that basically all the efforts of the regime were to try and downplay the impact, and that included, you know, applying a news blackout to sites which had been struck, and satellite imagery suggests that there has been a fair amount of damage, but also kind of controlling the media to make sure that it's portrayed as life as usual, that nothing changes, and you know that tells you know other countries that basically the Iranian regime is at the moment kind of more interested with its own survival, and perhaps, you know, getting into endless strikes with Israel at the moment is not conducive to that, particularly if Israel, for example, with the next round of strikes, struck its oil facilities, triggering an economic shock and putting the regime at risk.
Yeah, I mean, the American President Joe Biden was pretty clear he did not want to see oil facilities attacked, just as he clearly did not want to see nuclear facilities attacked. And it looks as if Iran, or rather Israel, listened to that. So the question then is, where does Israel go from here? They carry on with their operations against Hezbollah and Hamas, but what does the plan look like to you?
Well, that's right. I mean, in Lebanon, they've continued airstrikes today, for example, on Tyre, which is a southern Lebanese city. They currently have troops both in Lebanon and in Gaza. But there was kind of small signs that perhaps the death of Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, which was a kind of a big moment, and the US was pressuring Netanyahu to basically take the win and use that as an opportunity to advance ceasefire talks. Anyway, those negotiations for a truce have kind of back up and underway in Qatar, but no white smoke yet, and you know, no one should be hasty about saying whether that's going to lead somewhere, given all the disappointment from previous rounds of negotiation.
I mean, the caveat there is all important, isn't it? I mean, no white smoke. Let's not get hopes up for a ceasefire, because there's no reason to do that, is there? I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu's attitude to a ceasefire, it's not encouraging, to put it mildly.
Well, it also, again, it goes back to the political situation in Israel, where he is governing in coalition with extreme members of his cabinet, one of whom has specifically threatened to collapse the government if either troops withdrawn from Gaza or from Lebanon. So, the political pressure at home is very much in the direction of keeping the conflict on both fronts going. And, there is also, I mean, in Gaza as well, since the beginning, Netanyahu's approach has been to kind of, if he's to secure the release of hostages, he believes the best way of doing that is to continue applying military pressure. And, the past year would tell us that he will keep pursuing that tactic.
Right. Can I just widen the field of vision a bit to the war in Ukraine now? Because if Iran's missile making capacity has been hit, is that going to affect that country's ability to support Russia in the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, this is a kind of side effect. And again, we shouldn't overstate it. I've been in Ukraine where, for example, you can get 100 ballistic missiles or cruise missiles, drones, all the rest of it fired in one night. And, Iran had been supplying Shaheeds, which are these kind of kamikaze drones, but then they had also taken this first step towards potentially a much deeper arms partnership with Moscow. And that was in August when they sent this kind of first shipment of ballistic missiles. The problem for Iran now is that following those Israeli strikes, they appear to have had their production facilities severely damaged. So the stuff that makes the basically the mixes the fuel that goes in ballistic missiles, those factories have all been hit, which means that Iran's ability to produce missiles for itself, let alone to export to Russia, is a real problem. And so that could mean that in Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin is trying to sustain his war with arms from Iran, now we see troops from North Korea, that has been undermined by these Israeli airstrikes.
George, thank you. George Grylls there, the defense and political correspondent at The Times.